Good day and welcome everybody. I am Benjamin Wirtz, and I will take you through today's masterclass, how to succeed in your first year as a leader without burning out. Now, we've got a pretty action-packed hour or so in front of us. And just so you know who we are, at Scalable Leaders, we focus primarily on leaders in tech. So that's your heads of engineering, design, product, as well as non-technical functions at tech companies. But we keep hearing how valuable our content is from people outside of tech too. So everybody's welcome today. Now, this is the new and improved version of our most popular masterclass, and it's building on the great feedback that we've received, some new developments, new things we've learned, and it's not just for new and aspiring leaders. We also had senior leaders and HR leaders tell us how much they got out of this one too. So first of all, kudos for showing up and investing in yourself. We'll talk about this a little bit later, how important it really is. But I'm really excited because I know today could be a pivotal point in your journey as a leader. Now, before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am on and meeting you today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, our goals for today, and hopefully you've got the description of this masterclass. Your first year as a leader can be make or break. And by the end of this masterclass, hopefully as an inspiring leader at least, you'll have a really good understanding of the mindset shifts it takes to make it. And if you want to be a leader, it's best to actually get started with those today. And fear not, it won't be super theoretical. Like all of our master classes and everything we do, it's packed with practical insights and tools that you can apply right away. Otherwise, we just wouldn't be the first choice for so many leaders in tech. Now, everything is based on what actually worked for leaders who've gone through this journey at companies like Google, Atlassian, Microsoft, 𝑐𝑢𝑙𝑡𝑢𝑟, and many others. So for those of you who have already made the step up into a formal people manager leadership role, you're probably feeling an influx of stress and expectations, and that's perfectly normal. So we'll share a few things with you that have helped a lot of leaders just reduce the stress and the burnout, or the risk of burnout, and sort of the constant firefighting, while keeping the trust from the team and people around you. And last but not least, we also get leaders who are doing okay, but don't want to leave their future growth to chance. And we'll share a few things that will help you accelerate your growth, especially what senior leaders expect from you. So, and there's a bonus. Now, there'll be some of you who'll be actively thinking about which areas of leadership to invest in, either for yourself or if you're in HR, for the leaders at your organization. And so at the end of this masterclass, I'll share a link with you where you can go through a leadership assessment where we'll help you pinpoint your leadership strengths and blind spots. And so you get to go about growing your capability a whole lot faster. And again, like everything we do, it's highly practical, actionable. It's not like, say, the Myers-Briggs. All right, so who am I and why am I talking about this? Look, I'm the founder of and managing director of Scalable Leaders. And believe it or not, I pretty much started my career as a CEO straight out of uni, starting a company and gaining some funding and hiring a few people. And then I went back after that to being an engineer and product manager and sort of an individual contributor, and worked my way back up to working at executive roles like chief product or chief technology officer in startups and scale-ups. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some companies I was lucky enough to work with. And then I've done a few things as an operator myself that people tell me it's like, oh, that's impressive. I was very fortunate in some of those situations. So I've launched products that actually became very successful and generated a chunk of money for the organizations that I work for. I also went through the downs of like leading a team through 6 weeks of not getting paid and not losing anyone. And of course, this is not a career step I would recommend to anyone, not to do this deliberately. But also, there was a lot of learning going through the situation because, if you're going through a really dark patch and you want to keep the team together, you can't do that if you start thinking about how to build a good team and a culture that makes people stay right then and there. You have to start way before, and you have to be much more proactive as a leader. So and then there were other situations where I inherited teams that didn't do so well, and I turned them into the highest engaged teams in the organization. I pretty much consistently increased the productivity of teams by 30%, teams that I inherited, without growing headcount and sometimes without changing the team at all. So there's always more in a team than you might think. And then, of course, in the executive type roles in startups and scale-ups, I also developed leaders into becoming accomplished leaders and even executives themselves. And so this has always been the proudest moments of my career, when I help people break through barriers that they thought they couldn't get through. And so over time, I came to believe that our tech ecosystem is just so dependent on the quality of leaders we have at all levels. And if we just had better leaders, then we would have faster growing companies, and we would have a stronger ecosystem for all of us. And I've come across nothing that ever shook that belief. And so I decided to, play my part in it with scalable leaders. And so if you take one thing away from the masterclass today, then please let it be that leaders are made, they're not born. And I've seen this in myself. I was definitely not a born leader. I was, in fact, a bullied nerd. And then at some stage in my career, people started calling me a natural leader. And I know I wasn't. So I know, and I've seen this in many people that I've mentored and coached as well, it just comes from making a lot of mistakes and just engaging in the journey of being a leader and being a better leader and working on yourself. I was a stressed out firefighter. It's one of the themes for today, how to avoid that. Before I became a calm and strategic leader, and I definitely failed as a leader a couple of times, where I either lost the team or lost the trust of my managers. And then later on, I became a successful leader of leaders, taking teams through really rough situations and big changes, and earned my chance to develop in leaders at amazing organizations that I work with today, like organizations like _Culture that does just so many amazing things, scale-ups like Wiser in the fintech space, and for-purpose organizations like Good on You, and me and a group of amazing humans that I work with through Scalable Leaders. We help those leaders avoid some of the big mistakes that either we've made or came across, so that they can flourish and move faster and do great things for their organization. And so today, Scalable Leaders has flourished into a global community of leaders who are all trying to grow together. And that feels like a good point to talk about, well, how do we view the role of a leader, and what actually is that? And so I really like Brené Brown's definition. A leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. And I think for, especially the tech space, we need to make just one tiny addition to that and say people, processes, and ideas. And in my mind, that's really what the leadership mindset and role is all about, and what it sets it apart from being a manager. You can be in a people manager role and just look at yourself as a manager, right? And management is mostly about ensuring and monitoring execution. But leadership is about driving change, right? That's in here, developing the potential in people, processes, and ideas. It's driving change. And you can't do that without having a certain amount of courage and confidence and having the mindset that you really want to do this for, sometimes for yourself, sometimes and often for other people too. So that's what we'll use today. And of course, nowhere in there it says that you need to have formal people management responsibilities or authority over other people. You can be a leader without having any of that. And in fact, often it's easier to do that. Now, take a moment to sort of reflect on yourself and reflect on that definition, developing the potential in people, processes, and ideas. And ask yourself, do you recognize yourself in that? Are you someone who wants to take responsibility for finding potential in people, processes, and ideas? And do you have the courage, want to build the courage to develop that potential? All right? Again, you can do it with authority, and you can do it without authority. And one of the leadership secrets, it shouldn't be a secret, is people often get selected for leadership roles when they already show some leadership qualities and some promise as a leader. But when you get promoted, you can't rest on that, right? And the fact that you've been considered for the step up, or that you've been given that opportunity to step up as a leader, doesn't mean that therefore you're, a done product, and 100% in all of that. In fact, Leadership is something that humans have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And we're still not done, learning about what great leadership looks like. And no leader is perfect. We all have pros and cons, and we all have work to do. So let's get into some of that work today. Because for a lot of leaders who have made that step up, here's a few things that I always see and hear. One is, say you're an engineer, you step up into that leadership role, you find yourself being on the tools a fair bit and maybe wanting to be on the tools initially, because, that's what you used to do, and just changing the habit of, oh, there's this thing my team needs to do and I'll just do it. It'll be faster. That's a hard one to change. But when you stay on the tools, the next thing that happens is, well, you sort of know you probably should get better at delegating, but you're struggling with it because, let's be honest, it's not something that you had to do as individual contributor, at least not a whole lot. And then suddenly you feel this influx of expectations, right, from your team and your manager and so forth. We'll talk more about that. And so it can feel like you're just constantly firefighting. And it's just very easy to get into. And it's very common for new leaders to get into this. And so then, while you're firefighting, your stress levels rise and you just get frustrated with people because this person should just be able to do this or no, etc. And it just doesn't always pan out the way you'd hope. And then people start having this sense of perfectionism, right? When you first get into a leadership role, you probably did pretty well in your craft. And so now you've got, maybe 4 or 5 other people in your team that are also producing things, right? And it can feel like, well, this and that I would do differently. So now that I'm a leader, should I tell people that maybe they should do this differently, because surely that's going to help them get better at their craft, and everything that my team produces reflects on me. So what kind of leader am I if I let subpar work sort of, pass? So that can get very confusing. And unfortunately, then a lot of people end up micromanaging. They never wanted to be a micromanager. It's just being stuck in sort of the wrong mindset on what you should do as a leader. And then, you don't end up having the time for learning. But the question on your mind constantly becomes, is like, well, what does great actually look like? Why is it so hard? Why am I not getting there? And, a lot of people then think, well, somehow I'm not the leader I thought I would be. And they struggle a lot more. Now, if this is you, or if this is someone you recognize, then fear not, you're not alone. Again, it's very common. I'll tell you how common it is. There have been some great studies. 80%, 82% of managers are seen as lacking leadership skills by their employees. That's a pretty high number. And well, if you think back about the managers that you had in your career or that you've seen, usually when I ask this, people are like, yeah, that sounds about right. Very few managers really earn that universal respect and admiration of people. Now, funnily enough, there is another study that came up with the exactly same number, asking a very different question, which is, do you receive any formal training? And 82% of managers don't receive formal training, certainly not by the time they made that step up, right? So, well, chances that people are lacking leadership skills because, well, they weren't given any training and they just don't know any better. It's not for the lack of awareness. 87% of leaders wish they had more training before they started, right? So we have this gap where we think people are incompetent. They sort of know it and they want more training, but somehow it's not happening. Now, we'll talk about how to get out of that and why this is even the case in the first place. But let's talk about the impact first. And that is that almost 50% of middle managers say they are pretty much ready to quit in the next 12 months due to stress. Right? So getting into leadership role, I think most people understand that it means more stress. But does it have to be this way? And my opinion is it doesn't. Of course, there's stress that comes with it, but it's really about changing your mindset and changing your approach to your role that gets you out of a downward spiral. You can't win with just winging it. So that brings us to the 3 mindset shifts to succeed in your first year as a leader. And there's a trick to this. It's not just your first year. The mindset shifts and the things that we talk about, I found them universally useful whether I was working in an organization of 2 people or 200,000 people. Whether I was leading a team through 6 weeks of not getting paid, or a high-performing team that was generating millions. Whether I was leading, like a small team or a big team, or at IC level or as at executive level, doesn't matter. And so really, they're not just mindset shifts that will help you in your first year, but they'll help you throughout your career and your life to scale yourself. And so if you find them useful, they shouldn't be secrets. Do share them. Do share this masterclass if you like. So mindset shift number 1, actually being a leader. And hold on, this might sound a bit daft, but we talked about what does it actually mean to get to be a leader. And from the organization's perspective, it does look a bit different, actually, because the assumption is always, well, leaders get hired to lead a team. And unfortunately, it couldn't be further from the truth. No leader gets hired to lead a team. It's part of the job, but it's not why this job exists. Why the job exists is you get hired to deliver results. Basically, the organization has a set of goals they want to achieve, and they have a bunch of resources, that's the team, they want to use to get there. And they need someone to just take charge of this team and deliver the results. And so they're making a bet on, well, this person who gets into the leadership role is the right person to do so. It's not personal. All the things that you're thinking about of, like when it comes to being a leader in terms of taking good care of your team and investing in the culture and psychological safety, all that stuff, that's still part of it, right? But it's how you get there. It's not why you're there. It's not personal. It's just capitalism, right? Every organization needs to grow. You're there to deliver results. And we sort of can't get too emotional about that. But of course, we can and should have pride in how we lead the team to get there. And so it's a pretty fundamental shift in how you need to think about how you work. So this is a bit of a roadmap for you as a leader. Life as individual contributor is simple. You have one master. You just do as they're told. You work on your craft, whatever it is, design, engineering, marketing, sales, and you deliver results. And over time, investing in your craft, you get better at delivering results. You're faster, and so forth, and everyone's happy. Now, that's no longer really the case when you're a leader, right? Your role is to deliver results, but as a team, with that team. Chances are the results you get asked to deliver, they're bigger than what you could do solely by yourself, right? That's why you have the resources to essentially help you get there. And so it means you need to empower those people. And of course, your expertise and craft might still be helpful, but it's probably not the only thing that will help you get there, because your craft now becomes leading people and solving people problems. And so really what some people get into is they think of themselves as, well, I'm the +1 in the team. I'm in the trenches with the rest of the team. I do the same work, and I do this leadership thing sort of on top of it, on the side. And that's a fast way to burn out, right? If you're trying to do it all and more. And so one of the things that really helps is to think of yourself as a multiplier. Right. So being an adder looks like this. This is your team, the squares, and you do, one more thing. You also build codes and tickets, and you also take on, certain deals, and you do certain marketing stuff, etc. Right. Now, initially, that's very common to just do that and think you'll just do the leadership thing on top, because, well, you still have work assigned to you, and day one delegating it all to other people sort of feels weird, because especially if you get promoted from your peers and you're not just entering a new team, it's it's just an unfamiliar situation. But being a multiplier means actually keeping an eye on the road ahead. Right? And psychological safety, delegation, developing people, culture, all that comes in. It's looking at how you can get more out of the team as a whole, and getting more out of each person. And so when you can do that well, you actually, that's when you increase productivity of the team and output by 10, 20, 30%, right? And you're always going to be stuck at very low percentages by trying to do this and more, and then, especially if you burn yourself out. So, and it just comes up in like interviews that I've run, and in interviews that, like when I interviewed for jobs, how important outcome focus is, right? And chances are, if you're trying to do everyone else's job and then your own job on top, there's not enough time spent on the job that that actually is being a leader and keeping an eye on the road ahead, etc. And so, yeah, it's very hard to get real fundamental differences out of the team if you're just trying to be in the trenches. So, and here's then another trick to it, right? When you become a leader, chances are you're an expert in your craft, right? But it's really, you need to stop using your expertise in your craft as a crutch to lead, right? You need to think about how to lead through influence rather than just how to lead by knowing better, right? And so you need to pretty much pass on everything you do to your team, because once you step into the leadership role, your peers and the people that will now judge you, they are no longer judging you by your craft in your technical area, but they're judging you by how good of a leader you are. And leadership is its own craft, and you need to start focusing on that. So it's a big change. You're now in a room of, let's call them black belts, right? When you get promoted into a leadership role for the first time, everyone else has been there longer. Well, at least that's the chance, right? So they know what they're doing. They know what it's like. They know, the systems and processes and the strategy, and they know everything better on your first day. And you now have to meet the bar of being a leader and not just being good in your craft. So that's a big change. And why you want to give that up as soon as you can, relying on your craft, is because otherwise you won't get a chance at the next step up, right? Which is being a leader of leaders. So in the case of an engineer, you may be a front-end developer, you become the front-end lead, and then suddenly as a leader of leaders, as engineering manager, you're leading the front-end, back-end, and mobile team, right? And if you're relying on your expertise as a front-end developer, you're not going to earn the respect and build the trust and sort of, lead through influence in the way that you probably should at this level. And in fact, you're there to empower other leaders, right? So you now need to teach them about craft of being a leader in this team, in this part of the organization. And you're going to struggle doing that if you've always relied on your expertise in craft, because you're leading teams that you just don't know that as well how they work. And of course, you take it one step further and you work more sort of at leader of leaders level, or executive level, let's call it. And you need to change systems for leaders. And that becomes really challenging when you don't fully understand what those systems should look like, those systems of influence and strategy and everything. So it's a real pivot. Right? If you compare the actual things you do on a day-to-day basis as an individual contributor, again, example of being an engineer, you're coding, you're debugging, you're thinking about architecture, testing, etc., security, and you only need basic interpersonal skills, like not calling people names and sort of showing up on time. Now, as a leader, it's very different, right? You're developing the craft and others, sure, but you're also giving and receiving feedback. You have to motivate and influence. You have to manage up, down, sideways. There's so many more stakeholders. They're all black belts. You have to really delegate, hire and keep people and letting people go, knowing when and how to do that. Conflict resolution, and also knowing when not to get into conflict, or maybe when to escalate it, whether it's to HR or somewhere else. And then, of course, budget, salaries, and team culture, etc. So the things you do on a day-to-day basis, or should be doing, and think about, they're just so different. So it's a real career pivot, and it changes on day one, right? So if you're trying to cling to this, you're not investing into the individual contributor stuff. You're not investing enough time into being a leader, and that's what this mindset is really about. Now, there's, of course, a few other things that generally people don't talk about in terms of what changes on day one. So the first thing, of course, you get authority, right? You can officially tell people what to do, at least in theory. That's great. But what your team and maybe the people that you've been promoted from will see is privilege, right? Even if you're just interim or acting, right? Because you're not just there to tell them what to do or to make some important decisions, but they understand the role of a leader is now also to judge their performance, to potentially fire them, to assign projects that maybe they don't like and they wish they had this other one. And then there's, of course, the exclusive access of information that people know you have in terms of, company performance and upcoming redundancies or promotions or, other things that are going on that individual contributors are usually hidden from. And that information includes how much they earn. And in fact, they can probably take a good guess and think you're probably now earning more than them. So it's a bit weird for some people, right? And even if you had someone who was a very good friend, the minute you get promoted, they start looking differently at you. And it's very common, and there's very little you can do. It will also dawn on them at some stage that you got selected for this role, which means they didn't get selected, which means someone clearly thinks that you're better than them, at least in some shape or form. And they probably weren't even asked, or they weren't aware of this. So yeah, again, your personal relationships are affected. And so it's hard to make and stay friends with your team. Some people manage, I've managed, but it's hard. And it takes a lot of effort to build that trust. Now, then, of course, there's the influx of expectations. And we touched on this, but just to visualize it again, I see you've got one master. As a leader, you have your team who has expectations of what they think you should be doing, and they will judge your performance and how you wield that power fairly harshly sometimes. Because leadership looks easy, right? Then there'll be your peers who'll be black belts and like, well, and this is how we operate. This is how we need you to do. And they have expectations not just of you as a leader, but also of your team. And of course, then there's your manager, and chances are, the managers of your peers, or managers of other functions, the peers of your manager. So there's a lot of expectations, right? You sort of go from one person to, I don't know, sometimes 10 people, sometimes 20, can be a lot. And so you're back to being a white belt and trying to be the expert and doing it all and still passing all that expertise on to other people is a lot. And so it's a lot of pressure. And we get then to stress behaviors, and where some people find they are just not the leader that they thought they would be. And in fact, as the expert, you're often then a bottleneck. And in terms of stress behaviors, when people go through this, the thing they just want to do is just work on something that they know they're good at, get some satisfaction from that, and then go back to being a leader. But it's a slippery slope, right? If you're becoming an engineering lead and you just want to work on some tickets and you think, it's going to be faster if I do it anyway, etc., that's time spent where you spend doing the job of your team, and you're not spending time as a leader. You're not learning or investing in yourself as a leader. You're not keeping an eye on the road ahead, and chances are there'll be things coming down the road that will affect your team as well. And that's how it's very easy to get stuck in the firefighting hamster wheel. Now, there's one other thing too, and it doesn't get explicitly talked about enough. But when you're a leader, you need to be on the leadership team. So sounds simple enough, right? Now, as an individual contributor, it's very easy to bitch about those above and how incompetent they all seem to be, and how they don't see and don't realize and don't ask, and so therefore we're just trying to clean up all the mess of all the leaders, and it's easy to make friends that way. It's not the career move I would recommend to people, but it's a habit that's easy to get into. Now, if you keep doing this as a leader, or even when you want to become a leader, you're sort of missing the point, right? Leadership is hard, and yep, some decisions probably won't make sense to the people on the ground, because there's a whole lot of stuff you're generally protected from. So if you think your primary job is to protect your team and to lead them and to make sure this team is in isolation, the best possible team, then yeah, you're missing the point. You're there to deliver results, and there'll be things that the organization wants to do, or your manager wants to do, or senior managers want you to do, that you'll be misaligned with, you're going to disagree with, and you still have to commit to it, right? Because you're also on the leadership team. And sure, there is an element of protecting your team and flagging concerns, but it usually doesn't involve just saying no to everything. There'll be a whole lot of times where you have to convince your team to go into a certain direction, even if you think it's second best or less, and you'll have to do it with confidence and conviction, because otherwise they're not going to follow, and you're going to at some stage get caught bitching about those above, and it's not going to help you in your journey as a leader at all. So now we get to what we call the double load, and that's a second mindset shift you need to get into. The double load is just going behind the scenes of this. The skills you need as an engineer, designer, PM, or whatever craft you're in, and the skills you need to be a good leader, they're very different, all right? And what's behind it is, one is about solving, let's just call them technical problems in your craft. And the other one is about solving people problems. And it's not something that you get to do a lot as an individual contributor. Or, the more senior you go, the more senior you'll get exposed to it. But there is, most organizations, they don't have technical problems, they have people problems, right? Which is why we need the leaders, and which is why you can start helping with that and being a leader even without formal authority. But it's a lot, as we discussed, and the expectations are a lot. And sometimes there'll be days we're just thinking, well, gee, 24 hours are just not enough. And you know what? The workload may be unreasonable, and we need more people, and we've got the wrong people. And it's very easy to get into the victim mindset, right? That you just can't because you're overwhelmed. And if you do that for too long, and if you're too vocal with it, unfortunately, you're done as a leader. No matter what stage you're at, no matter how long you've been there, you need to take a different mindset. You need to, say this kindly, but firmly, you need to stop the pity party, right? The whole thing of what if we just had more people or higher budgets, I've seen it in 2-people companies. I've seen it in Google and Atlassian. It never changes. So if that's what you're clinging to, and you're constantly telling your manager that's what you just need more people, then unfortunately, yeah, you're in the wrong boat. The expectation is that you can flag that, you can request it, absolutely, but taking mindset that, well, we can't do it if we don't, is not the right one. The right mindset is more like, well, here's what we can do with what we have, and here's probably the things that we would deprioritize. You need to be on the leadership team, right? And you need to learn how to manage all that pressure and stress and influx of expectations, which we've looked at earlier. It can be a lot. So the problem with all that is, let's say it's your first day as a leader, and people know it's your first day as a leader, and you're sort of meeting expectations. But no matter whether you're a leader or in a craft, especially now with the changes of AI and agents and so forth, that the expectations, they are always just going to move one way, and that is up. So if you don't find ways to solve the problems, and your problems in terms of your development and managing everything, you're going to get left behind. And once you realize you're behind, and then you want to catch up, the bar just keeps moving. So you're always going to be behind. And the unspoken expectation of senior leaders in HR is usually, if you want this, if you want the privilege of leading teams and making a bigger impact, then you need to go out there and get it yourself. Investing yourself and making known that you want to invest in yourself is always going to help you, and is always going to turn heads. And no one's waiting for you to do that, and they're probably not going to push training onto you. And even if your organization does have a leadership development program, well, chances are it's only for leaders that are already in that position. And I've seen programs that run once a year. So worst case, you're going to spend 11 months as a leader, and that means a full performance review cycle without any formal training. So you need to think about how you can get out of that. And so you've got another problem too then, which is, well, technology is changing really fast, right? Not just in terms of technologies that we build with and technical systems, but then also AI and agents and how teams need to operate. And so you're always going to be expected, if you started as an engineer, to still know something about engineering and today's state of the craft. So you need to learn really fast as a leader how to meet the bar for leadership and how to keep meeting it. And you still need to meet the bar for you're up to date on your craft and your technology, right? There's no CTO today who can claim, well, I don't know, the cloud and AI came after my career as an individual contributor, so I don't know about these and I don't need to, right? You always need to. Even if you're in sales, you still need to know how to make a deal when you're chief sales officer, chief revenue officer, and so forth. So you have to keep up with both. And that means your brain has to do a whole lot of learning. And that's what we call the double load. All right, you've got a broader role, you need a broader set of skills, And you need to invest in both. And so that's a lot, especially if in the past, personal development or professional development wasn't really so much on your mind, and it's something that sort of happened on the side. You need to be very, very deliberate about it now. And in fact, if you want to go higher than just being a team lead, you're going to face a triple load, which is not just, well, you need to sort of be a competent people leader, but you also need to understand the business. Right? So you can align proactively, become more influential, understand the strategy and the metrics, and make sure that every decision that gets made in your team is aligned to that. And it doesn't, if you don't understand it, if you don't fully understand the business and all the metrics and how every single goal of the company funnels down to the goals for your team, then you're going to have a pretty hard time doing it. So then, yeah, you need to learn about not just your craft and leadership, but you need to learn about business too. And so, again, this might feel like, well, shouldn't my manager or my employer have my back here and support me with that? And the unfortunate truth is they are just not equal partners in your career. And they know it. So if you think this will all happen naturally and someone will hold you by the hand, you're looking at the wrong career. That's just not the case as a leader. Training that happens in companies, leadership training, is often very compliance focused. It's often focused on company specific systems, like, well, here's how you hire with us, here's how you fire people with us if you need to. And the whole thing of like really investing in yourself and having a bigger impact and scaling yourself so you can take on bigger projects and responsibilities and roles, that's not really anyone else's responsibility. You might get funded, which personally I believe would be fair, but you might have to go after it. And so that means making time in your life and how you're set up to fill these things in, because chances are they're not just going to happen instead of your day-to-day work. They need to happen on top of it. And so you need to think about how you can make time for that personally. So that brings us to mindset shift number 3. We've talked about the, what happens on day one and all these things. And there is a fallacy that people get into, which is, it's really busy right now. I just need to get through this one more, sudden request by the CEO, or this one more project, or we just hit the snag here and we just need to get through this. And so the thinking is, I can kick the can down the road just a few more weeks, and then I start with it. And the problem with that is it is the new normal. It won't change. If you think it's just one more thing, you're always going to get stuck in it. And we see this in a lot of leaders where they're saying, oh, yeah, 2 weeks, and then I'm done and things are calm again. And unfortunately, it won't. And without getting too personal here, sometimes it is the way you lead and the way you think about leadership and how you approach certain situations that keeps you stuck in this hamster wheel of firefighting. And one of the things that we always say at Scalable Leaders is, when you think you don't have time to invest in yourself as a leader, that's when you need it the most, because that's when you're stuck and when it's very easy to start falling behind. And it's unfortunate, but it is the case. So no matter where you're at as a leader, there's always going to be a lot of change. And there's always going to be, when there's change, you need to start aligning people again. And when you need to start aligning people, and, sometimes it also means hiring and onboarding and rehiring, even if it's, aligning people from another team, or it's, like making different teams that you have no authority over, aligning them on a certain change you're trying to drive. So hence, very important not just to lead with authority, but always with influence if you can. And so you'll find as your team changes and as the dynamics with other teams change, there is always forming, storming, norming, and there is sometimes very little performing. There's always something that happens, and you're the person having to lead the team through that. The forming, storming, norming doesn't happen by itself. And of course, as you're trying to align people and, norm and get to performing, there's going to be new ideas, and then there's going to be realignment. And there's always going to be conflict, especially in fast growing organizations where maybe, your headcount grows 20, 30, 40, 50% year over year. there's always conflict, and there's always people who come in who think, oh, this way of doing it is weird, there's a better way, and there's butting heads, and well, people will look to you as a leader to manage that conflict, to potentially prevent it, and to escalate when necessary. Because otherwise you're going to have lots of trouble in your team, and you're not going to get a lot done, and you're at risk of just, with too much conflict, you're not going to get the results done that you're there to achieve. And so through all of this, it triggers imposter syndrome in a lot of people. It's very common. I've met so many leaders who even have been very accomplished, have done amazing things in their career. Even the Atlassian CEO talked about still having imposter syndrome. And so it's very common. And especially when you look at like the hundreds of things that you seem to have on your list, and you're trying to burn the midnight oil, and somehow you just always get stuck at something. Unfortunately, it's only going to get worse if you don't manage that imposter syndrome in some way or another. Because when you're doubting yourself, that's when your decisions and everything you do takes longer. And if it takes longer, well, the influx of tasks and expectations doesn't stop. So you're just slowing yourself down, and it's chances that it's going to get worse. And so you need to get out of that very quickly. And so you don't get stuck in this hamster wheel of firefighting. Now, there is a framework that I want to share, that we've shared with a lot of leaders, and like for some it's been life-changing. For us, it's been like, wow, I just look at my role very differently now. And so that's to get out of the mindset of there's all these hundreds of things to do. Because if there's hundreds of things to do, then you're gonna think of like you're gonna have a lot of headspace that's invested in context switching and all these things and all the problems at hand. So what if they were only 3 things that you needed to do as a leader, right? If there was only 3 things you needed to think about every day, life would be simpler. And everything that I've learned about leadership and all the frameworks that I looked at, etc., we've distilled them into just 3 things you need to think about as a leader. And you can do this even, in an organization of 2 or 200,000 people, even if you're an individual contributor. And we call them the SUN principles, sometimes the scalable principles, because they scale so well through organizations and through whatever level of leadership you're at. Now, think of the sun, right? When it comes up in the morning, the first thing it does is it brings light. Before it was dark, and now we can see. And you want to do the same thing for your team. You want to bring clarity. When a team has clarity and understands, where are we going? Why? What are our top priorities? And what are our guardrails, boundaries, values, principles, right? Then they can run so much faster, right? And it's surprising how many leaders get this wrong. We do all this work on strategy and on vision and on priorities and on sprint planning and all these things. And we can go through the motions, but if the team still doesn't have clarity, then it's all for naught. And so I promised this would be very practical, right? So there is one question I recommend you ask the people in your team today. And I would say ask them individually, one by one, and ask them, what are our top priorities right now? Maybe ask them for the top 3. What are our top 3 priorities right now? And the test is not whether you get an answer and whether people know. The test is whether you get consistent answers. Because if you get different answers from people, they are misaligned. And that means when you're trying to have a conversation on processes and like solutions, etc., there's going to be lots of discussion and potentially conflict because they're misaligned on what is the most important thing. So you need to make sure that everyone in your team understands what the top 3 priorities are. And you can test that every week. And it's a great feedback loop as a leader to see, are we getting closer to having clarity? Or are we getting further away, right? If you developed another 20-page strategy document and people read it and somehow they're not getting it, even if you keep telling them over and over again, if they don't have that clarity, then you've got a problem. Now, the second thing the sun does is, well, somehow people, especially in Australia, they want to go outside, they want to have a barbie, they want to sit on the beach, etc. Right? So somehow the sun generates energy, and people are in happier spirits, and that's what you want to do as a leader as well, right? So all the work we do on, say, psychological safety and motivating and inspiring, etc., it's all just making sure people generate energy. And that means they feel safe, but they also feel inspired. They want to go, or rather run, to where we want to go, right? You brought clarity, now you need energy. And so one of the things you can ask yourself is, next time you're in a meeting, next time you're on a video call, look at the people and don't focus on the discussion, the technical thing that might be discussed, but just ask yourself, do I see people who feel safe and inspired? Are they leaning into the conversation? Are they happy to challenge each other, right? Are they willing to take risks and put themselves out there? Do they want to be there? And so in some organizations, you see, someone's leading the discussion, and a lot of people are just nodding and trying to move along. And maybe on video calls, a lot of them have cameras off. There's very valid reasons for having cameras off, but there's just some companies where nobody turns their camera on, and it almost feels like nobody wants to be there. And then people force cameras on, and well, you can have cameras on, but that doesn't generate energy at all. In fact, it just creates more resentment. So they're starting to feel less safe and less inspired. So it's really like, look at the faces, look at how people engage with each other, go just completely on a meta level and ask yourself, are they safe and inspired? And if not, ask yourself why. Maybe ask them why, and figure out where do the wheels need greasing. Now, the last thing the sun does, of course, we can't eat it, but we can harvest it. We can do all sorts of things with that. And so you as a leader, you need to empower people and teams, right? You can't do it all yourself. You need to be a multiplier, and you need to think about, what do people need to do more, to get more out of it, right? And so these principles, they work in order, right? If you don't have clarity, it doesn't matter how much energy you have in the team and how empowered people are. They might be able to run very fast, but they might be running in the wrong direction, right? If you have clarity, but people don't have energy, well, that's also not good, right? You need to work on that. But at least you've got the general, at least you're moving into the right direction. At least you've got the clarity. So everything you do as a leader, I promise you, will fit into these 3 buckets. And so that means when you wake up tomorrow morning, there's only 3 things you need to think about as a leader. And what you then actually do, whether it's refining the strategy or putting on a workshop or asking people how they're doing and investing in one-on-ones, it's just part of it. But if your team has clarity, energy, and is empowered, I promise you they'll achieve amazing results. So in summary, the mindset shifts are about actually being a leader. And that means you need to focus on delivering results, being a multiplier, and being on the leadership team. Managing the double and triple load that you are going to hit as a leader, and that can feel just crushing at times. It's going to take it out of you. Stop the pity party and just invest in yourself, and signal that you want to invest in yourself and that you are investing in yourself and that you take charge of that. Don't wait for other people. Don't wait for someone else to solve the problems, right? That's not being a leader. And then embrace the new normal, right? Like, bring clarity, generate energy, and empower others. Yes, it's hard. There's going to be lots of challenges, but look, put the bricks into the right order. Bring energy, bring clarity, generate energy, and empower others. And there's 3 simple questions you can ask, right? If that's all you do this afternoon or tomorrow as a leader, you're gonna be doing much better, and you're gonna find out amazing things on how to get more out of this team and how to be a multiplier. Now, this, of course, was only the tip of the iceberg, right? This would be my recommendations for you for your first year. And if you're already a leader and you're not doing those things yet, I highly recommend getting to them. But going it alone as a leader is really tough. And there's so much more to uncover, and all the things that you need to do on a day-to-day basis, and how to bring clarity, generate energy, and empower people. There's so many best practices that are worth learning about. So you can run faster, right? And you don't have to make the mistakes that other people have already made before you. And so the question is, the things you want to think about is, how much more impact could you have if you scaled yourself, and if you scaled yourself faster than before? How much more could you potentially earn? Or at least, how much less stress would you have? And what would that mean for you and maybe your family? And how many more opportunities could you get exposed to if you signaled, and if you grew faster as a leader, and if people started to recognize your growth as well. And so, of course, there's all sorts of ways in which you can do that. Now, we exist because we found problems with all of them as well. Courses tend to be pretty rigid, right? Like, you as a leader, you already have strengths and weaknesses, and there are things that are relevant to you right now, and there are things that are not relevant, right? If you do a course that's 10 modules every week, 1 to 10, then you might be going through the module on how to hire, when right now you're going through redundancies, and so that's time wasted. So you either don't attend and don't learn, or you just you attend, but you don't have time to focus on the thing at hand. Workshops, especially if company organized, they're great, but often they're too infrequent. A lot of leaders are lucky if they have sort of an annual leadership development day. And think of learning an instrument, right? Leadership is just another skill, like learning an instrument, like learning to code or learn AI. And if you learn for a whole day once a year, over the rest of the year, you're probably not going to improve very quickly. And you're going to forget a whole lot of stuff that happened during that day. So our brains just don't work like that. I think most of us would have learned at school. It's much better to engage in learning a new skill or something more frequently than just doing it as a big cramming session. And that's what the workshops are. Coaching, great. Had my own executive coaches, but it's also very expensive, and it tends to be pretty ineffective if you don't have a solid foundation of leadership. And of course, there's a lot of books out there and a lot of blogs, etc. And unfortunately, I found personally a lot of it is just very theoretical, and a lot of it doesn't really apply to leading a team in tech. Reading a book from the Disney CEO, lots of amazing things in there. Reading a book from a guy who led a Navy submarine, great stuff. And there's always lessons you can take from that, but also there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't translate to leading a team in tech, right? Running Disney is very different to running a small engineering team of 5, building a product in a startup that doesn't exist yet but could be $1 billion idea. So very different ways of operating, and it takes a long time for you to try things and realize, well, actually that doesn't work here. Sounds great, but it doesn't work. And so that means the impact of a lot of these things is too slow. Now, you can check the website, scalableaders.com, on like how we grow leaders faster than other organizations, and how we rebuild leadership from the ground up for leaders in tech and other fast-growing organizations. I won't tell you that here. I'll save you the time. But what I will tell you is that investing financially in yourself as a leader, or in leadership capabilities in your organizations, financially is a no-brainer. And there's just a very quick case study. So if you fund it completely yourself, right, you can, in a leadership role, often get a salary increase of, well, let's call it 20 to 30K, right? And that's not even including leadership bonuses, equity grants, future promotions, etc. And of course, you can't put a price on your mental well-being in terms of like being more confident and having less stress. It's an easy 10x ROI, and that doesn't even include potential tax deductions that you can get. Then that sort of easily, for a lot of people in tech, will double it. If the organization funds it, the numbers are even better. Because think of a leader having 5 reports, and it's not too unreasonable to say that this team would have a $750,000 payroll. Now, personally, I achieved 30% increases in productivity in teams within sort of 6 to 12 months fairly consistently. And everything I learned is in the Scalable Leaders program. But let's just say you achieve 10% in your first year, which I think is very reasonable. You're still generating a productivity gain of $75,000 a year. That's an easy 24x ROI. And that's without positive impact that you're going to have as a leader on retention and the cost to rehire, et cetera, et cetera. So it's probably one of the best investments that you can make. And in fact, leadership is the most transferable and the best remunerated skill that you're going to have. So it's an investment in your career. I will send you a follow-up on how you can get up to 47% tax deduction in terms of investing in leadership skills. So those ROI numbers can look even better. And look, I've seen a lot of leaders, hundreds of them, and I noticed there's a real difference between the leaders who struggle and probably struggle so much that they kick the can of investing in themselves down the road. They try to stay hands-on, they try to do it all, they try to satisfy everyone, they sort of copy best practices, it's a bit hit or miss. And then the scalable leaders, they learn to scale themselves, they do dedicate that time in leading, learning, signaling that they are doing this. They protect their headspace, they are much more resilient, authentic, and inclusive at the end of the day because they have that headspace for it. And they scale themselves. And so, of course, you can go it alone. Chances are, going alone tends to be faster. Chances are it's cheaper. And some people will say, well, look, I don't have a problem. And, well, we've all seen Finding Nemo. Look, every leader has problems. And it's okay if you don't feel them yet. Chances are the expectations are always going to increase, and hopefully you don't get into a situation where you're behind. But we had so much success, and like leaders have said so many kind things about us, feeling more confident and becoming more intentional about their relationship with their manager and having the resources to tackle difficult situations. Already changing the way they lead after 2 sessions, and thinking about leadership maturing, and for organizations when they do it at scale, noticing that the leaders change how they approach their roles within a couple of weeks. What our offer to you is no commitment, no strings attached, but you can get a free leadership assessment with us. We can have a chat about your goals, we'll pinpoint your strengths and your blind spots, and we can, talk about what the next 12 months are going to look like and how well you're set up for them. And hopefully that is very well. And of course, if there's things to develop, then at least you've got an actionable plan and you can go out there and figure out what is the best program for you, whether it's us or whether that's something else. That's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope to hear from a bunch of you. And otherwise, go forth and lead, be a leader. Think about the mindset of a leader and think about the Sun principles. Bring clarity, generate energy, and empower others. Thank you so much. You have a great day.